We both actually have an engineering background and started a marketing and sales consultancy.
Product marketing is a thing that I think has a gigantic impact on people's perceptions of products. They really love products because of product marketing.
You could probably use this messaging framework to say, how via the product are we communicating across these three things? So if these are the three pillars of the company, and your page talks about none of those three, like you missed something.
Hi, I'm Craig Kirsteins.
And I'm Rimas Silkaitis.
And you're listening to Practical Product, a bi-weekly series where we discuss product management and some of the unique challenges we face in dealing with defining the right product and all of the coordination necessary to help teams build it right.
Practical Product is brought to you by Heavybit, a program dedicated to helping startups take their developer products to market. For more information, visit heavybit.com. If you're interested in being a guest on this show, or if you have a specific topic you'd like us to dive into, you can reach us at practicalproduct@heavybit.com or on Twitter @practicalproduct.
All right, and we're back on another episode of Practical Product. Thanks everyone for joining us. Today I've got Brian and Mike with me from Reify. Brian worked at New Relic and GitHub in marketing, and Mike was actually the first employee at Code Climate. Guys, can you just tell me a little bit of like your background and kind of what you're doing now?
Yeah, sure. So we both actually have an engineering background and started a marketing and sales consultancy. So that's kind of an odd transition probably for a lot of people.
Hang on, I thought engineers don't like marketing and sales.
That's why we make money with our consultancy.
Sound effects, can we get the drum notes?
Yeah, we can get that in post-production.
Yeah, so I mean, we both came from this, product and engineering background, and in both, I think we're inspired by the business side of software. Really being concerned with not just is this product good, but do people want to buy it? Is there a market for this product, and how do we actually develop a thesis around bringing that to market?
Now, do you do kind of consulting around just marketing and sales broadly? Is there a certain focus to it? Like, is there a typical type of company you work with?
Yeah, so within the type of company that we work with, there's definitely a niche. So we typically work with companies that sell products or market products to developers or other technical people. So we kind of call ourselves a B2B SaaS marketing and sales consultancy. We have clients that don't necessarily sell to developers, but they sell technical product. Maybe they sell into a marketing department at a company, but it is a software product, so they have to get buy-in from a technical organization in order to complete a sale. So we help them with that.
But it sounds like, so by and large, is kind of this tech focus, dev focus. Like, it's not kind of B2C world.
No, we don't have any consumer companies as clients right now. It's pretty strictly B2B. Yep.
Cool. And so I think today we actually wanted to dig in a little bit to some of that duality of like marketing, product. Like, you both have engineering backgrounds, so I'm sure you've kind of experienced some of the types of marketing that developers and product people and engineering focused companies, kind of butt heads with. So like, how do those things kind of coexist in a more collaborative way? Like, how does marketing work together with product? How does product work with marketing, et cetera? Like,
one of our big projects at Reify is really to get people to understand the interactions between sales, marketing, and product functions in tech companies. And so when those things butt heads, there are cultural components to that, right? And the way that people choose to run their companies, who they choose to hire, like what the founders' personalities are and things like that. And we can help with that, but, we're not really psychologists, we're technologists. So we tend to approach it where we try to get people to understand that there's a push and pull, right? That when you make a decision that's a marketing decision, there will be impact in product. When you make a decision about pricing or product, it's going to impact how you do sales and marketing and things like that.
And I imagine there's a lot of kind of key areas where like marketing comes in and actually adds value, right? I think, Brian, you kind of hit on that, just glossed over it, but like, making sure there's a fit for the product and there's a market for it, like that's key. People, even engineers do usually like to make money, right? Like they're happy to have a real business. So how do you kind of jump into that part of like adding that value, driving that? Like, what are some of those initial discussions that you guys come in on?
Well, I think the interesting thing, if you talk to technology companies, they're often starting with a product idea, right? The origin story of all these companies is I had an idea, I wanted to bring that to market, and I built
I had
it.
a problem I wanted to solve, that
Yeah.
whole thing.
There's
right.
a itch I want to scratch.
Exactly.
Sure. And so the second step is they might have to have a company because someone gave them money to make a company to sell that product, right? And the third leg of that stool, though, is the market piece. And so if you have a product without a buyer, you don't have a company for very long. And I think the classic blunder that we see a lot in these companies is that a lot of people think about telling people what they built without realizing that there's has to be a market on the other side that's like wanting to respond to that. And so what is the demand? Where is it coming from? Who is your buyer? How much are they willing to pay? What does the competitive landscape look like?
Yeah.
All these things exist in the sort of market leg of that stool. And in early stage companies, it almost never exists. And so a lot of what we're doing now, especially with early stage companies, is kind of filling that role to audit the thinking and the success so far and understanding like how it's hitting the market, doing our own research, talking to customers and things like that.
So it sounds like, we're talking about early stage companies here, but is there a dichotomy between a more established company that may have a set of product lines and what they need to work with versus that early stage company? Are there differences between the two?
Yeah, I think what's funny is almost everybody's pricing came out of like, a bar conversation or something. Like somebody like, pulled a deck of cards out and like picked some numbers and may have had some success. And so in fact, there's often these, the next phase of success for them is going to come from repackaging their product. Because I think another thing that people don't do enough is they've been building product for a long time. Pricing hasn't changed, often in many years. And it's the packaging of that that's going to start actually opening your product up to a new market, potentially, right? That's one of the components that could do that. And so that's a way that we can also kind of come in and help us talk to all these customers and find out what is the piece of this product that's actually motivating the purchase?
Yeah.
And what's the competitive pricing landscape look like? And how should we do pricing now with evidence of data, which you didn't even have when you priced it the first time?
Now, where do you start on that pricing data, right?
Yeah.
How do you, that's the thing of like, I took the business courses in school where it's like, here's the supply curve, here's the demand curve. And
Here's
like,
my elasticity. Like,
exactly. Like
Right.
there's the perfect kind of econ chart. And
Yeah.
it's like, great, I can ace this test. And then you get out and you say, how do I price this product? And it's like, I don't know what these levers are. How do you test that? How do you get to data?
I mean, so this dovetails actually with like the question you asked earlier about like what are the first conversations that you have with companies where you're trying to determine their market, try to get them to product market fit. We have questionnaires that we use with our clients and then questionnaires that we use with our clients' customers. And when we talk to our client, the first thing that we ask them is who their customer is, right? And we really we like to make founders and executives really uncomfortable by asking them the questions that they're sometimes not really willing to ask themselves or ask each other, which is really like, who is this person? Where do they work? Name the like, let's go through your customers. We tend to work with people that have some traction between seed and A round or something like that. They've sold it to their friends, right? They've reached their network. They know who these people are. We ask them, questions that on paper look kind of crazy, right? Like what blogs do they read? What conferences do they go to? And when we do that, what we do is we bring the customer for them from the abstract to the concrete, right? And so we try to say like, let's stop talking about your buyer persona is not a developer, right? Your buyer persona is not a Ruby developer, right? Your buyer persona is a lot more granularly defined than that. So a lot of the initial conversations we have are around the who. And then in terms of like bringing it to the data, how do you get to the data? Like we talk to customers, right? We're really big believers in willingness to pay and the input that willingness to pay has into, what you can charge for a software product. So we recently did a pricing engagement with a company who's pretty far along, again, between seed and A, and we got on the phone with 20 of their customers and ran them through the same questionnaire. And by doing that, began to develop a sense for what they care about, what they really think they're buying. And also we just ask them, How much would you pay for this, right? Would you pay this much for this product, right? You know how much value it brings you, right? How much would you pay now? How much would you pay if we added this feature? How much is this feature worth to you, right? And sometimes people are not willing to ask that question themselves of customers. Sometimes they don't feel like customers will be honest with them. And so we have really interesting leverage in being outsiders where we can just come in and say, hey, we're doing this project with this product that you love. You want this product to be around for a long time. You rely on it. How much would you pay for it if it looked like this, if it looked like this, if it looked like this?
I'm just kind of curious, what have been some of the results, the spread? How far off is that delta from like what the companies thought?
Very far. I mean, we are, Craig and I have had we've had exchanges on Twitter about, companies should charge more money for software. So I think it's uncontroversial to say that developers who are building products and trying to turn them into companies tend to undercharge for their products. And so,
but I've heard developers are cheap, right? Like that's
well, right. Okay, so it's actually true. I think developers are cheap a lot, but they're also not always the buyer. Right, and they're often your entry point into an SMB, right? But they're not necessarily your buyer. And additionally, the difference between $9 a month and $99 a month for your, it's a lot more than $90 difference, right?
Sure.
So your ability to create a product that someone will put down a credit card for $1,000 for a year, right? Let's get you to that place first.
And you hit on something there for a second of they're often your entry point, developers are. And Brian, you kind of hit on that of there's what is the product feature set and the portfolio, kind of what comes into the differentiating, how do you, what is the product set and what do you price and which, how do you formulate that? How does that come in and where does that, because usually, the product person is saying, hey, this is a problem, we're going to build it, we're going to ship it, and we just roll it in, right? Let's just keep rolling in the feature set. Where does that kind of dichotomy work? You've worked at a couple of interesting places that I think started with developers, also targeted large enterprises. How's that split happen? What's that dichotomy? How do you start to evolve? Because I imagine a lot of these early stage companies start at developers. Then at some point you start to grow up and go up market in a way. Mm-hmm. How do you do that and not alienate? What's that look like?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of interesting strategies to think about there. And the first is the fact that you have to have messaging for each different tier of people you're trying to communicate with, right? So if you are talking to individual developers in a specific context that have a definition that you're solving a particular real problem for, the communication of that might come in the installation process and the documentation and that kind of stuff, right? And the pricing for that is probably going to be relatively low, right? You're also looking for traction, feedback. Those early customers are really valuable to you more than the dollars they're paying.
So your metrics there are completely different. It's
totally.
Active users, just word of mouth, growth, buy-in. Okay.
And also once you've got a volume of those customers, now your job is to learn from them. And so now it's understanding, well, how can we segment these customers into piles? And what communities are responding to what features? And it's almost impossible to do this by industry, right? So every product is going to have a different way of approaching the segmentation. And then from there, you mentioned pricing. That's a different person looking at that page often, right? And so how you're communicating pricing and the kinds of things you're talking about to that audience is going to be a little bit different than what you're doing for documentation or onboarding, right? So here you might say, for example, individual developers that are looking at a product feature page on GitHub are looking at features that make my life easier as a developer. It's about personal productivity, it's about community. But if I'm selling to a business manager who's going to buy thousands of seats of this product, now we're talking about collaboration and innovation at scale, right? Those are different motivating factors for that sale. It's the same product, but you're now talking to two different audiences.
Same product, and you sell it the same way, or do you price it? How do you create that different value there?
Right. So I think the value actually comes, it's going to be obviously different for products, but a lot of times what we see this pattern, right? There's an individual user account type, and that's usually the developer version of the product. It's single user. It's probably all access, kinds of things. Interestingly, as you go up market, some of the features that you add to a product to make it cost a lot more and get a bigger relationship with that company is not a new feature of the product. It's almost a restriction. So if an organization, for example, can say, I'm in control and this group of users can do these things and this group of users can do these other things, that level of like management and organization is something people pay for, right? Because there's a risk of a super user screwing something up, right? So it's interesting that you can actually do a lot around the edges of a product to make it much more valuable to a large organization, and that you can charge a whole lot more for it. That's not even part of the core product, really.
Can you pull back on features that you have once released, like to speak more tactically, right? You know, can you launch something as a product manager and say, oh, here's this thing, it's valuable to these, you know, upmarket type customers. Can you pull that back to then put a restriction in place to then charge more? Or once it's out there, and that's it, it's done.
I mean, nothing's permanent, right? I mean, you know, I think the answer to that question, you know, if we're speaking tactically, like it depends on the volume, right? It's like, is it tens? Is it hundreds? Is it thousands? I think that particularly in startups that are, you know, in this early stage, trying to grow, trying to get larger, they sometimes underestimate the goodwill that they have with their customers, right? Their customers are developers. They're a developer too, or used to be. And, you know, being honest with your customers goes a long way, right? So I think we've both been in that position probably to like write emails to customers to explain to them like why these things are happening. You know, you give them 6 months to do this, you give them a nice discount, you know, you roll them into it eventually. But I don't think that I think you have to think really hard about not making a decision like that to ameliorate your customers at the expense of like, you know, potentially tanking your bottom line. It's a really tight rope to walk, but I think communication and the quality of communication has a lot to do with that. And then that's something that Brian and I really enjoy working with clients on.
So, I mean, you can roll it back. I assume the better option is to like know where you package it in the first place. How do you get to that? Like if you haven't had some of those customers, you're trying to go upstream, like, you know, my usual kind of product answer is like, which way is the wind blowing today? Like, does this, you know, feel enterprisey not being in that market? Or how do you know how you bucket features?
Yes. Like alternatively, I was going to say as a PM, you know, the question I would ask is like, how would I know, or where would I go to get that kind of information to then be able to, you know, make that decision, right?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question. Competitors and what competitors do is one answer. You know, we never recommend that people just, you know, copy competitors' pricing and packaging, but seeing what a more successful company in your market segment is able to charge up market for is typically a good indication. Talking to customers, talking to users that are using your product for free early on is reasonable. But that's hard. That's a lot of where the art is, you know. And what I think is an interesting thing that Brian and I have run across is like, there's the product set, you know, how you package that and provide that to customers. And then there's like on top of that, like, what do you communicate to your customers, right? Like, what goes on the pricing page, right? What are the 3 features that are the 3 most important features to your customers, right? So we had a client who, when we started doing the pricing engagement with them, they're like, cool, like we have 64 features in our product, and you know, here, you know, like our product has 64 different features. Here's a spreadsheet. We're interested in seeing.
I fit all this on the pricing.
Yeah, they're like, we're interested in
flashback to those checkboxes
Yeah,
on the pricing
feels
page.
like an Oracle feature product.
Right, we're interested
where it's like a binder. Here you go.
Yeah, we're interested in seeing how you're going to like fit this in, and we're like, we're not. That's how we're going to fit it in. We're going to erase 61 of them. You know, so we have a process that I think is actually. Has been successful for us and might be interesting to your listeners regarding just doing really simple things like making, you know, talking to customers or thinking about customers, making lists, dividing them up into, you know, groups.
So I'm kind of curious to walk through this. So let's say I've got like 50 customers.
Yeah, 50 is a great number.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then now where am I going from these 50? Like, what am I doing with that list?
You're going to talk to as many of those 50 as you can, right? First of all, you know the existing list, right? Like you've got your 64 item spreadsheet, right? You're going to talk to your customers and really ask them the question. These are hard questions to ask, right? Like what, the typical one is like, how hard would it be for you if this stopped existing? If we didn't do this anymore, right?
Tomorrow, or
how much would that hurt, right? If this feature didn't exist, would you still buy our product and things like that? So we start with this list.
And you go down all 64 features. One by one.
No, of course not. But what we like to do is like, so the customers are one input into it, and Brian might want to like chime in on this. Like the founders and the executives in the company, they have like, particularly at this stage, they have incredibly good intuition most of the time for what their customers really care about, right? So we like to do the exercise first with the people internally, and then use that as the input into what we talk to customers about. So if you've got 64, we're going to turn that into 3 groups of whatever that is, whatever 64 divided by 3 is, and then we're going to whittle those 3 groups down into 3 features in each group. Right? So now you've got 9 things. You're not allowed to talk about more than 9 things. And those 3 groups of 3, those get a name, right? And naming those 3 groups of 3 is crucial in order to be sure that you're able to communicate the value proposition of your product. So an example would be if you're selling an infrastructure product and you're talking about redundancy, and you're talking about your SLAs for support, and you're talking about whatever it is, response time. Those 3 features might go under a category that's called like reliability or something like that, right?
Okay, so it's not any 3 arbitrary. It's like kind of
the most important 3. Yeah, yes. The thematic component to it is super important. So that like what you should be able to do is you should be able to take this big list, whittle it down into 3 tiny lists, name those things, right? And if those 3 pillars, we call them, right, of your messaging, if those aren't like the right thing, you screwed up, right? You picked the wrong features. You were not being honest with yourself about what people care about. You chose the thing that you implemented most recently instead of the thing that people actually buy. You write down a feature that might not even exist yet that you've always wanted to do because you think people think it's important. But in reality, we've seen that when people actually go through this exercise, create a framework for them to be able to do this, when they're done, they're looking down on paper of like, oh, wow, like I recognize this. This is my company, right? These are the problems that we created this product to solve.
And what's funny, this going through this framework is super useful when it comes to pricing and packaging as well, because we would also look at this, layer on the pricing plans that we're trying to develop, and you should see differences across all 3 pillars in all of your plans, right? You kind of want to run this check that says, oh, okay, so there's more of something, or there's some kind of scale in each of the plans. And what people tend not to have, at least in our experience, which is probably another great input if we ever had it, is a map between here's our 50 customers, right? And some of those are in different plans. What features are they actually using? And what's really compelling about that information, if you can get it, is that you might find out that it's like a very tertiary feature that happens to be in this other tier, and that's why they bought it, right? The headline is not the thing. It turns out that it's some esoteric feature down the list. And so that's where you start pulling out this like actual value that's motivating a sale that's maybe different from, what you think.
Now, is there ever a case where there's like one pillar that's only focused on larger companies, or is it like, no, you wanted a spread across all 3 of those, right?
It's a really good question.
Because I think reliability is a great simple one. Like even developers care about some level, they may not care about like 24/7 phone support, right?
I think that if you're going to sell across a spread, right? If you're going to sell to people, single devs, SMBs, and enterprise, you're not, my gut tells me you wouldn't have a pillar that only pertains to one of those markets, right? That all of your market segments care about like some level of this particular thing, right?
Yeah, and that's exactly, you bring up support as an example. There may be an open source version that doesn't have commercial support, right? That would be an example of that, where it's going to scale over time.
Yeah, support is a good one. Various, enterprise-y authentication protocols, access control lists, things like that. The enterprise-y stuff.
So to change the conversation just a little bit, how do we take all of these learnings and apply this back into the product to give the product, its own personality? Because, that's something that I don't see a lot of PMs actually think about or talk about, is that your product actually has a personality when you build this out there and how it communicates.
Yeah, I love that
voice, idea. Everything else. How do we rope this back in as PMs?
Yeah, I think at the end of the day, this process that we go through is about messaging pillars. And then when you come to product, you've got a little bit of a different framework because you're mostly thinking about use cases. And so sometimes those are going to be spread across those different things. But what's important is it's a very similar process of lists, grouping, naming, filtering. And then I think what's super important, obviously, is consistency. And so, if I'm logged into your product and I've been using it for a while, and then I see this marketing page or a Twitter campaign, if that seems like an entirely different product, like you screwed up, right? You should be able, even though I said earlier, you want to have different messaging available for these different kinds of buyers, but it shouldn't shock them, right? It's not going to shock somebody. An individual developer is not going to be shocked at the fact that I'm talking about, corporate innovation at scale when referring to GitHub, right? That's not the feature they're buying, but they would understand that it's related, right? In the same way that, your product features need to be kind of in that same kind of architecture, that they relate in a way that's, harmonious in messaging and has the same voice.
So we're not necessarily saying that like every pixel of every text box that we create has to look exactly the same across the entire product. It's just that you're communicating something that is of same type that you're trying to show, across all of these segmentations, I guess.
Yeah, and I would argue actually what's important is if you have your key pages in this app, so maybe there's a dashboard or there's different kind of views, right? You could probably use this messaging framework to say, how via the product are we communicating across these three things, right? Even though you're in a work channel, how am I thinking about, if I had an issue, what's my support? How am I supporting you when I'm looking at this dashboard page, right? How am I thinking about reliability? How am I communicating that to you? So if these are the three pillars of the company and your page talks about none of those three, like you missed something, right? So there's got to be, it's really handy to have these two things that, for everybody to use for those reasons.
Yeah, I like the idea of the personality too. We've done more work so far with our clients kind of on the front end, like more further up the funnel stuff. But when I was at Code Climate, that was a thing that we took really seriously in terms of like the voice of the emails that we sent from the app, the voice of tweets that we did for marketing, and inside the app trying to make sure that there was a level of consistency so that people could kind of tell that this was from the same personality. It's interesting. There's almost like a interesting kind of like moods analogy you could make here, right? Of like this personality is like now, they're being a little bit more business-like over here, and they're being a little bit more fun over here, but it's like the same person, right? It's coming from the same perspective. The values are clearly aligned, stuff like that.
I want to pick on that word values just a little bit. How important is it to have the same values across product and marketing, and or to ask that another way, like how does product and marketing interface such that those are shared values so that they're creating the same personality? Because what I see in a lot of my work is that product marketing can just be kind of over there doing their own thing, whereas I'm just building something and I'm in my own silo and just releasing how I think.
Marketing should just listen to what product says, and we're all happy, right? Right. That's the healthy world.
That's the Craig answer.
Yeah,
right?
I think that it's not easy, right? That let's just like go out there and say that. Like finding people that are good at both or who can understand both or translate between both, sometimes challenging. If one group is siloed from another group, clearly there's going to be divergence there. That's not going to be healthy for anyone.
I think the thing that solves this in every environment that I've ever seen is contact with customers, right? So if your marketing team feels closer to the customer, that's where your tension's going to be, right? Because they're out at events, they're talking to people, they're much more closer to the ecosystem partners or whatever. There's a whole kind of world there that they understand because you're fitting into other tools. There's more tools than yours in the universe, and they understand how people see you, and that definitely informs product and voice. But the same can be said. I've seen product teams that are much closer to the customer, right? Where there's product marketing that's back in a different room, and they're just kind of asked to create collateral without the context of people and product and market.
Yeah, I think we
right?
talk a lot about talking to the customer, engaging with them, and I think it's for us, in product, it is very key, and I think similarly in marketing, as product marketing, it's very key, right?
Yeah, I mean it's the same person, right? Like you don't become a different person once you buy the product, right? Exactly. You're still talking to the same person, and they care about the same thing, right? And now that they're in your app doesn't mean you should spend less time or energy considering how you communicate with them. And I think that we're all really, product marketing is a thing that I think it has a gigantic impact on people's perceptions of products. I think people try and buy products all the time because of marketing, but they really love products because of product marketing, right? Like everyone loves Slack because of the stupid, little touches here and there sorry, I don't mean to call them stupid, but the little touches, they're not like, they're like completely impossible for me to ever like conceive of or execute on. Like to me, it's magic, like to know how to do that well. But Slack's a good example. GitHub has had some good examples of those things over the years. Companies are better at that or worse than that, and that those touches, once you've gotten a customer into the product and they're using it, I think are really powerful. And you should forge a connection, between those parties.
Yeah, one thing I wanted to mention too, I think one of the ways that this starts to pull apart sometimes in teams is that because marketing is so focused on growth and new customers, your point of view is very skewed toward that new user. And in product, over time, you can see product teams that know the app too well. They know it too much. They know their own vernacular. And they kind of can sometimes miss that new user experience because it's like, oh, we forgot to add all these communication things because I haven't seen the new version of that screen in 5 years, right? I don't think about those things. And so that's another way I think that teams need to kind of remind themselves of what that, top-down funnel looks like.
We've talked a little bit about product people building support and helping onboard customers and that, getting that beginner mindset back, because once you lose it, it's very hard. But I think, being out there alongside marketing, right alongside, talking to new users, customers that are thinking about the product, why are they even considering it, whether it's at events or otherwise, is another great way to kind of keep that fresh mindset of what are people thinking about when they're even considering you.
Yep. And also the same goes for sales, right? Like, in our view, product, marketing, and sales are literally the same thing, right? You really need to be saying the same things, or they're the same customer. And so riding along and going into sales calls and talking to people and having to convince them is a really healthy way of
I'm going to use that line, like, you don't become a different human being once you buy the product, Yeah.
Great line.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because it's like they're, I don't know, Craig, or both of you, I'm interested, like, what companies do you think, what products that you use right now do product marketing very well?
Is this where I mentioned Citus right now?
Should I say Heroku in return? I'm thinking of a few, actually. I think Code Climate's a good one to go back there.
Stripe, possibly?
Stripe's a great one.
When I think about all the stuff that they're doing between the documentation, their outreach amongst developers and everything else, it feels like I can build a relationship with that company.
Right.
Yeah, I think actually Stripe jumps out to me, especially at being larger too. I think it's really easy for a really small one to possibly do some of that because it's often the same person doing a lot of it.
Sure, yeah.
And the bigger ones is where you see some of the coordination issues.
Yeah. I mean, I think Heroku has been historically a benchmark in a number of ways for marketing and product marketing both. I
I'll take full credit for that.
I
since
started.
No one else can defend it right now.
Right.
Oh,
yeah.
well,
I
great.
mean, I just remember. I mean, like when I was at Code Climate, I helped launch a whole platform developer program thing, and we studied the Heroku stuff like very closely when we did that. Just the experience of like visiting this documentation page that described to you like how to create an add-on or whatever, like that stuff is just killer, there's just so much energy and attention put into it. It's kind of like daunting actually to see from the outside, if you're, and probably a lot of people listening to this podcast are like not in the position to have obviously like teams of people working on these things, right? Like you might be.
I think you'd be surprised early on how small some of that. It depends on what time you were looking at. How
right.
Small.
No, this was like last year I'm talking about.
So last year. Definitely
No,
larger teams
initially, I mean, I remember seeing it initially and it was good because, Heroku typically had, I think, above average documentation and stuff like that. But right now, if you go look at like the how to create an add-on Heroku stuff, it's killer. Walks you through the whole thing and really gives you, it talks about the things that you care about as a potential creator of this add-on process. This is a little orthogonal to like just typical product marketing or whatever, but
like your product marketing to just a different customer. But
right.
That customer is the same customer, whether they're thinking about that, whether they've launched it, how do you support it? So I think it still completely applies.
Well, it's one of my tenets. When I do anything product related, is that anything that customer touches as part of your organization, whether it be landing pages, pricing pages, documentation, that's an opportunity to further the voice that you have with that customer,
Sure.
further that personality. Because if you're not being thoughtful about that kind of stuff, then I hope you're in an industry where cost is your only concern because, you have a monopoly on everything that's going on there.
Yeah.
So, that doesn't necessarily mean that if you are going to, think about all of these things, do all of this stuff to make sure that you contain that voice, that you have to do a lot of things. You can do a few of those, do them well and launch them and still be in a good place.
So I think we covered a lot of topics here. You basically gave away kind of all of your business, and now everyone can go in self-service. We know how to create the lists and the the feature set and the pillars.
We write about a lot of this stuff on our blog, which you can probably link to in the notes.
No one should ever hire you if they want to know anything more. They know everything they need to.
Yeah,
This is
pretty much
all we got.
Pretty much.
What else might you leave on the product manager side? Like, what do you want to tell product managers while you've got a final say to here's what you should think about with marketing or should care about?
I have a chip on my shoulder about email, so I'll take my minute to talk about that. I think that email is incredibly important in terms of how products communicate with customers, and that if I were to make a tactical recommendation to a company that wants to make sure they're doing a good job on this, it's a really simple thing that we used to do at Code Climate, which was print out all your emails, all of the emails that your app sends, right? Look at them on a table, print them out. Does everyone who's listening to this podcast know what a printer is? Print them out, right? Put them on a table side by side. First, make a list. Ask yourself, can I name all of the emails that my product sends to customers, right? You're definitely forgetting 25% of them if your company has been around for more than a year and you have more than a handful of customers, right? Mm-hmm. Print out all your emails, label them. Right. So it's first day of trial is day 0, right? Then you've got 0, 3, 5, 7, whatever you're sending, print them all out, read them and ask yourself, am I doing a good job? Am I in terms of consistent voice, right? In terms of not being annoying, right? In terms of I wrote this email, this transactional email to get sent when a user clicks a button a year and a half ago. Does the product that I'm asking customers to use even exist anymore in the same shape, right?
It's huge. It makes a ton of sense.
Yeah,
it's a thing that you probably don't think about as part of that perfect intersection.
Yeah, everyone thinks about their marketing site, their pricing page, their Twitter avatar, but they create emails, never delete them, and I think customers can have bad experiences because of that.
Brian, any personal chip you want to leave with?
That's so good, though.
I think it's fine if we want to just end on that note.
The only thing else I would add back to kind of the spending time with customers thing, I think, is just encouraging everybody to work alongside people in every different team, right? So I've learned immense amounts from spending time in customer support. I've learned a ton of time hanging out with ops folks and understanding that the thing I was just pushing was causing a lot of other people pain, and actually understanding the whole impact of what you're all doing together to be building a product and service, that this affects every team and we all see things slightly differently. And the more well-rounded that experience is, the better you make decisions.
I think it's another super, everyone can't see at home, but like a bunch of heads nodding to that statement. Like, yes, like talking to the other teams, super key, especially in product. And I think product marketing as well is a very cross-functional role where you need to understand all sides.
For sure.
Right.
So thanks again, guys, for coming on. I think, if people need further advice, guidance on marketing and pricing and otherwise packaging, hopefully they know everything they need to on the list now, but if not, they know where to find you.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks so much.
Thanks a lot.
That's all we have time for today. If you're interested in being a guest on the show, or if you have a PM topic you'd like us to dive into, you can reach us at practicalproduct@heavybit.com or on Twitter @practicalprod.
To learn more about Heavybit, visit heavybit.com, and while you're there, check out their library. It's packed with amazing talks on sales, marketing, product, and general management from founders of developer tools companies and other industry leaders.